But my theory is you get to invent your life, that your life is your startup. Your life is your enterprise. Don't screw it up by just wasting it. I mean, and you screw it up by screwing it up is the whole point. By, take a shot. And and when you want to do something else, spiral around, take your career down to the studs. Take your work and your life down to the studs every 10 years and start again if you want to do something different. Because, you get a certain number of years and you got to have an adventure and you got to love other people and you got to lift people up.
What could go right? I'm Zachary Karabell, the founder of the Progress Network, and I am here, as always, with Emma Varvaloucas, the executive director of the Progress Network. And we are having a series of conversations with stimulating people about stimulating, complicated, often unaddressed aspects of who we are, who we want to be, what we've been, and what we're heading to. And today we're going to have a conversation with one of the more unusual and I find compelling voices in our public sphere, Arthur Brooks, who has had multiple careers and worn a number of hats and is now a best-selling author as well as a professor at Harvard, both of which are interesting, but not nearly as interesting as the sheer elegance of how Arthur describes what's most essential in the human condition, which we will get into with him. But as a quick harbinger of things to come, one of the things that is most striking about our contemporary world isn't just the noise of negativity, which the Progress Network seeks to offset, not necessarily with an aura of positivity, but with a reminder of the complexity of the human experience and the degree to which we're all in the present responsible for creating a future that we want to live in and not the future that we fear we're heading toward. What's unusual is the way in which so much of life has become siloed and segmented. So you can have a conversation about politics, you can have a conversation about personal development, you can have a conversation about religion, you can have a conversation about sports, you can have a conversation about international affairs, you can have a conversation about economics. But it's very difficult to have a conversation about all those things simultaneously and one's personal relationship simultaneously. And yet we're all individuals having emotional reactions to all of those things. And as we'll talk about, it would be a very different and perhaps much more constructive world if we allowed the personal to intersect more frequently with all of those siloed categories. So Emma, tell us a little bit about Arthur and his most recent book as well.
For sure. So as you mentioned, Zachary, Arthur is a professor at Harvard, and he has written 12 books. His most recent one that we're going to talk about today is called From Strength to Strength, and that came out in February 2022. He writes for The Atlantic. He's a host of the podcast, How to Build a Happy Life, which is a really useful listen. And before all this, he served for 10 years as president of the Washington, D.C. based American Enterprise Institute, which is one of the world's leading think tanks. So we're really excited to talk to Arthur, and please welcome him with us.
So Arthur Brooks, let's start where we will almost certainly not finish, which is with your new book, which for those of you doing this in a video context is nicely blown up behind your right shoulder, From Strength to Strength. And for those of you listening to the podcast, you'll just have to take my word for it that it's blown up over his right shoulder. So this book, like a lot of what you've written about over the years, has a component of you trying to answer questions for yourself, and in so doing, also answering questions, presumably for all of us, given that we're all share more than we don't. So just give us the radio pitch for the book and what it's about. And there was also a big Atlantic excerpt from the book.
Sure, absolutely. It's a book about not leaving your happiness up to chance as you age. When I had this idea, I'm a social scientist. I teach happiness classes at Harvard University, and I realized that there's not very much about happiness as you get older. There's a lot about, life hacks for young people, which is great. And I teach, 27-year-olds, 28-year-olds at the Harvard Business School. But there's this assumption that as you get older, you just got to hope for the best, live right, and just sort of assume things are going to turn out okay for your happiness. And that can't be right. Like, I've been in this business long enough to know that there's got to be a 401k plan for your happiness out there someplace. So I spent by the way, I did this for myself. This is not research. This is me search. And which it all is when you're a social scientist, especially specializing in happiness. And I spent 7 years trying to find the practices that most reliably change the odds that you're going to get happier as you get older, as opposed to less happy as you get older. And I think I actually found the answer. I think that I can pretty much, I can't guarantee, but I can remarkably raise the odds for anybody who reads the book or is listening to us here, that they can be happier at 75 than they were at 25 if they do the things that are in this book that all of the happy older people have in common.
I love hearing that, because I've been telling people for most of my life that I'm 65 years old at heart. So I love to hear the fact that that's not just breezy throwaway line, that I can actually get happier as I get older. But if you're going to give the people listening some spoilers, they're like a top 5 we can give them to make their happiness trajectory go up and not down.
Yeah, for sure.
But only do the top 5, and make sure that you say at the end that if you want to know 6 through 10, you'll have to buy and read.
You're gonna have to buy the book. That's the premium content.
Right.
Exactly right. So, well, to begin with, there's the one of the things that people who work hard and play by the rules and try to achieve a lot and they're successful, that they all think that's wrong, is that you're going to be satisfied by achieving all your dreams. That your dreams, if your dreams come true professionally and for worldly terms, you can bank that and count on being happy when you get older. And that's completely wrong. It's not just false, it's the opposite of the truth. There's a really interesting data set. Actually, it's a ton of data by a bunch of researchers that looks how happy people get when they get older. And you find that, generally speaking, adults, their happiness kind of drops a little bit over most of their young adult years. Not a lot, just a little. You're having your kids and that sort of thing. And then over early 50s, it turns around and almost everybody gets happier from 55 to about 70. It's good years for most people. But then people break up into 2 groups. There's about half the population keeps getting happier all the way to the end, and the other half starts getting unhappier from about 70 or 65, 70 all the way to the end. So the key thing is, like, what do the people on the upper branch have in common, and what can I do to stay off the lower branch? That's basically what it comes down to. And most people think that if they have a lot of success in their life, worldly success, they make a lot of money, they do what they want, their worldly dreams come true, then they'll be super happy. They'll be in the upper branch. And that's actually wrong. The strivers in life have this curse, actually, appropriately called the striver's curse, in which if you are, somebody who does a lot, you're going to know when it's over. Look, if you never do anything with your life, you're not going to know when the party's over, because there was never a party. But if you make a big party with your life, when you actually inevitably have some declines, you're not going to like it and you're going to be frustrated. And so that's the first big myth that we need to explode, is that worldly success is not the key to late life satisfaction. On the contrary.
So I wonder, though, what the nature nurture part is, right? I mean, there's a lot that you write about in this that is very much in the spirit of, we all of us have a great deal of individual autonomy about how we relate to our lives, our present, our past, our future. The pushback against that would be, there are clearly people for all of our lives who we encounter, including ourselves, who are wired a certain way. That there are people who are more predisposed to be aware of the downsides, or to be Eeyore-ish, to take a Winnie the Pooh analogy. And then there are people who are much more likely to always look on the bright side of life, all due respect to Monty Python. And, I think about this a lot, and we created the Progress Network partly as a way of saying we could all collectively be better served by being attuned to what is positive, or to the work that people are doing to create a more positive future, as attuned as we are to the negative, in balance. Yeah. But there are clearly individuals, right, who are somewhat constituted one way or the other. So
yeah,
how does that affect what you're saying?
Well, 50% of your happiness is genetic. And we know this from identical twins that are separated at birth and raised by different families. And then they get them back together as adults and give them personality tests. So between 40 and 80% of all of your personality is genetic, basically. And which is important to keep in mind, because, and it's about somewhere between 44 and 52% of your baseline happiness is genetic. So I'm not going to say that everybody can be perfectly happy at 75, because some people are like you are, and some people are just ebullient when they get happier. But everybody can be happier than they would have been otherwise. And that's a claim that I think is a responsible claim to make. Some people who really struggle with happiness or struggle with mood disorders, struggle with really high levels of negative affect, they can improve. And it's interesting because you see a lot of people who are, they're less neurotic as they get older. They're more open to new experiences as they get older. They have, personalities that are friendlier as they get older because they're doing a lot of this stuff right. They're getting their happiness hygiene on point. And that's what this book is all about. This book is not about perfect happiness. This is a book about getting happier than we would have been otherwise and getting happier as the years go by. And those are claims that we can really, really make no matter where you start out.
And one more before I'm going to preempt Emma for a moment. One more push about this general thesis on that spirit is, I think a lot of people think of happiness as a state of being where there is less pain and less conflict and more pleasure and more feeling of connectedness, and that you are who you want to be and that your life is as you wished it to be. So where, though, is the role of constructive struggle in that, or of, as it were, pain as part of the gain, and not simply a state of being that you define as happy, which means one of the absence of pain or the absence of conflict or the absence of challenge?
Yeah, well, so you're defining a lot of different ways to describe it. You're defining Epicureanism from the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who defined happiness as a series of pleasant feelings characterized by peace and tranquility and friendship, etc. And we also think of that. That's where the idea of hedonia comes from. It's hedonic with respect to good feelings. It's hedonism comes from that. Although the ancient idea of hedonism was not unbridled immoral activity. On the contrary, Epicurus was deeply, deeply moral and deeply upright. But he believed that, and he had a cult actually around him. But they were very peaceful and they were very friendly. And the whole idea was good feelings. There's lots of good feelings, lots of stuff to read, lots of stuff to eat, and good feelings all around. Today, we would think of that as kind of psychological hedonism. And a lot of people kind of go according to this theory that the philosophy of the best life is to get rid of the bad stuff. It's just, back in the 60s, they'd say, if it feels good, do it. Well, psychological hedonism today, especially among millennials, is more like, if it feels bad, get rid of it. If it feels bad, treat it. No matter what it is, if you go to the campus counseling center where I teach at Harvard University and you say, I'm feeling really, really rotten, they're going to treat you. They're not going to say, well, guess what? A full life has suffering. They're not going to say that to you, but that's true. It turns out the problem is that there's liability involved and you don't know who actually has a mood disorder. And so you can't send people away saying, you're living a full life, get in touch with your suffering. But, the truth is we all kind of do have to do that in some cosmic sense. So the way to think about this for everybody is that happiness has three elements. It has three macronutrients to it. Sort of like food is made up of protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Happiness is made up of enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. And purpose requires suffering. It just does. When I ask people, when did you find your true self? When were you aware of the meaning of your life? They never say it's like that week in Ibiza. That's not what they say. They talk about, my mom got sick, or, the family business went broke, or I got kicked out of school. They always talk about hard things. And maybe there were some pleasant things thrown in there, but it's always hard things. And the reason for that is because pain and suffering and your reaction to them, this is what makes you grow. This is what defines your purpose. Purpose is a macronutrient of happiness. And so paradoxically, if you go through life trying to avoid unhappiness, what you wind up doing is avoiding a lot of your own happiness. And so you have to, like, life is a big experience. Most people, they don't even want to be happy all the time. Most normal people, they want to feel the appropriate feelings to life. That's why people listen to sad music. Sad music brings you down, man. I got data showing that it will literally stimulate the parts of your brain, the anterior cingulate of the brain, which is responsible for you feeling physical pain. You listen to sad music, it stimulates the same part of the brain. People do it on purpose because they want to feel something. And feeling something is part of being alive. That's part of purpose. And that's actually part of happiness in the proper understanding of eudaimonia, a good life, a full life, well lived. So yeah, we shouldn't be in the absence of suffering. That's not life at all.
Yeah, Arthur, it's interesting what you say about millennials in particular wanting to, avoid the bad stuff or get rid of the bad stuff, because it certainly seems like we're having, at least in my age group, the sort of like collective thing about acknowledging trauma. And that like we're all like weighed down and bogged down by trauma. But on the sort of social level of conversation, there's not a whole lot about what you mentioned in the book and are talking about now, which is that trauma and loss are not always harmful. Like it's an enormous opportunity to create meaning in your life. And I'm wondering about the loss of like that social conversation of transmuting the trauma and loss into meaning. Like, why has that seemed to have not, why has that been lost from society, it seems like?
Well, part of it is that society tells us that a good life is one in which you feel good all the time. The second thing is that we've got kind of the victim Olympics going on all the time, which is to say, when there is suffering and trauma, there's two ways to look at it. One is, this is happening to me. Somebody's doing this to me. And the other way to say is, I am experiencing this. And those are two different ways of actually looking at suffering, looking at pain. And to say, I am experiencing this makes it part of a full life. It doesn't mean you don't want to eradicate it. Of course, you want relief and you will do what it takes to get relief, but you'll experience the suffering while you're on the path to relief. That's entirely different than getting no meaning from it because you're in the mentality of grievance and victimhood. And again, there are legitimate grievances in the world, don't get me wrong. And people are victims, to be sure. But if we're in the kind of a culture of saying, I'm looking for the ways that things aren't working out for me, and I'm looking for the perpetrators of those things, and I'm going to concentrate on the grievance per se, you're not going to find personal meaning and personal growth in those things. On the contrary, a lot of our politics today on both right and left are based on grievance. They're based on identitarian grievance. And as such, it's kind of a source, the victimhood is permanent and a source of power. And that's not going to give you meaning. That's certainly not going to bring you the macronutrient of happiness.
We talked about this a bit, Emma, with Jonathan Haidt in the first season, who's another member of the Progress
he's an
Network.
old colleague and collaborator of mine. He's fantastic.
And talked a lot about the challenge of suffering, right, is not to then descend into victimhood. It's to have that experience, and I guess to some degree to own it. I know that's a bit of a cultural cliche, the idea of own your experience, but the value in that is sort of back to the mantra of your current book is you are then living your own experience, right? You're not living someone else's experience of you or someone else's diktat of your life. But I think that is a very challenging one, right? To embrace what you've just said, that sometimes life, particularly when there is an endeavor that it has meaning, can be immensely challenging and immensely difficult. And that doesn't really scan from our traditional notions of happiness, which you've articulated so beautifully, are, I think, largely at this point filtered through more the hedonism and the lens of zero pain. And I've felt like happiness is a challenge for Americans because it becomes a set point that assumes the absence of difficulty, and therefore it's either always a will-o-wisp, meaning it's a never achievable state of being, right? Except on, I guess, a lot of sedatives, and even then, not really.
Not really. No, you're not experiencing your life at that point,
right?
Yeah.
Then you're just numb. But what do you think? I mean, because there's a cultural thing too, right? You talked about some of it's genetic. There's also cultures that are more like happiness cultures, and there are cultures where it's not seen as appropriate to speak of happiness, right? And Americans clearly have an expectation of it where other cultures don't. How does that, in your mind, shape some of these questions?
Well, I've written about that a lot, and there are cultural differences in how you talk about happiness, how you define the word happiness, and how you actually experience happiness in different places around the world. Collectivist cultures do it in different ways than individualist cultures, for example. In parts of East Asia, a lot of happiness is defined as tranquility. It's defined as, social peace, for example, is how you would think about it. And so there are those particular differences, but as a general rule, it's for those indices of, world happiness. The United Nations shamelessly plugs this index of happiness, where every year they talk about the happiest countries, and it's nothing more than a pretext to say that Northern European social democracies have got it right, and all the rest of us need to fall in line. And it's like everybody's got to be Denmark. I mean, that's what the United Nations really wants, is for us all to be Denmark. And then so they say, and see, they hold out the carrot of happiness. But the truth is, we define happiness very different than the Danes. I'm not going to cast aspersions. Denmark's awesome, but I don't want to live in Denmark. My grandparents were immigrants from Denmark for a reason. They were just, they were ambitious riffraff that didn't want to have a Danish lifestyle. They wanted to start a farm in South Dakota and see if they could, make it on their own. Different strokes, right? And different countries actually have different sets of ambitions. The really interesting thing for me is how we as people are all the same. And we're way more the same than we are different, way more the same. I mean, this is one of the key things in an identitarian kind of polarized world, where everybody's looking at these big differences: my tribe, your tribe, my opinions, your opinions, my this, my that, this group, that group. Ugh, it's so boring, because the things that we have in common are so vast and so important. And so the really interesting things, okay, so half your happiness is genetic. Another half of that last half, in other words, a quarter, is circumstantial, and we're all open to the same set of circumstances. And everybody thinks that if their circumstances in life are right, they're going to be permanently happier. And that's wrong. That gets to this first mistake that people make. If I make a bunch of money and I have a successful company, or if my kids do really, really well, whatever it is, then I can bank it. I'll be happy for the rest of my life. Circumstances never last. You're on a treadmill. You can't, as Mick Jagger saying, you can't get no satisfaction. Actually, you can't keep no satisfaction. You can get it, but you can't keep it. And so what you really need, what we all need, is to have the right happiness hygiene, the right habits of happiness. And those are the kinds of things that we all need to do at any age to be as happy as we can be, and the right things we need to do to bank to get happier as we get older. And those are the two things I teach about and that I write about.
Yeah, so Arthur, that's what I was just about to ask, which is really a me search question, because of course your book is primarily for people who are, I guess, in the latter half of their life.
Actually, for you, because the earlier you start on your 401k, the more it grows and the better it is when you retire. So yeah, this is a book for 25, 45, 65, any age really, so that we can get happier as we age, for sure.
This is exactly what I was going to ask, because a lot of the book, as you mentioned before, is about like your career goals are not going to bring you lasting happiness. And I remember very clearly reading something about David Brooks, who was sort of like, if I were to fashion a dream career, it would be something like David Brooks. And it was like one of his books hit the bestseller list and he felt nothing. And I was like, that freaked me out. Like, it really honestly freaked me out. And it made me wonder, reading your book, like, is it we should be striving and setting up our life and doing the career things and all this and all that into a certain age when we start to decline? Or is it what you're saying now, which is like, we're doing that, but we're also setting ourselves up for happiness, success? And are the two things, mutually exclusive? Like, how does that all work if you're on the younger side?
Yeah. Now, David Brooks and I are old friends. We're actually not related, even though we share a surname. And he did tell me that. And I remember, David says like, yeah, I got #1 in the New York Times bestseller list, and I felt nothing. I'm like, let me see for myself, David. Let me see for myself. And it's interesting because last week this book was #1 in the New York Times bestseller list.
How did you feel?
I thought to myself, yeah. I mean, it's like, I got to say, it was actually, I didn't feel nothing. It was awesome. It was awesome. But I was mostly happy for, the people who made it so, my editor and the people who, pushed the book tour and the media. These are the people who worked super hard. I'm just the guy who wrote the book and whose name is on it, but it's a team effort, and you're so happy for the people you love who are behind it. And that kind of points out the real truth of this, which is that happiness from achievements comes because of the shared success with people you love. Happiness from achievements doesn't come because your dream came true in that particular moment. You could bank, I'm a #1 New York Times bestseller forever. No, I'm for a week. That's it's intense satisfaction for an hour, and then a glow for a day, and then the credential for a week, and then you're just another loser. So, so if you're going to bank, you're trying to bank those things, you're going to be hopelessly frustrated. On the other hand, if you're going to say, this is awesome, look what we did, and this is an opportunity for us to come together and love each other and compliment each other and say, yay team, that's real satisfaction. And that's what you put in the bank. and your 401k of happiness is improving relationships on the basis of mutual admiration. And that's one of the things I write about in the book, as a matter of fact.
Well, I mean, there is like sort of the mid ground between those. It made no difference and it made every difference. There's I guess, a Buddhist saying, I don't know which tradition of, how do you attain enlightenment? Chop wood and carry water. What do you do when you attain enlightenment? You chop wood and carry water. And
Right.
and it's the idea of, I've thought about this a lot, also having written a lot. You had better enjoy the process of writing a book. Because the process of publishing a book and promoting a book is about a nanosecond,
Right.
relative to the process of writing it, thinking about it, cogitating it, the effort in it.
Yeah,
There's a lot more behind the scenes than in front of the scenes.
for sure. And
And
that's life. There's an
right.
old joke. There's an old existentialist joke. What's first place in a pie eating contest? It's pie. So I hope you like pie, right? Because if you don't like pie, don't enter a pie eating contest. And all we're just in a bunch of pie eating contests. I mean, I have these MBA students at Harvard, and I'm like, I hope you like pie, because you're studying pie, you're accumulating pie, and all you're going to get, and as a result of this, your reward is a lot of pie for the rest of your life. And so this is the key thing. You better like writing books, because if your book is really successful, which it usually isn't, I hope you got a lot of inherent satisfaction no matter what. And if it's really successful, it means you're going to get to write a whole bunch more books. So, time for pie.
I think we should name this episode that, Time for Pie. Arthur, since you were pointing out, okay, big thing to put into your happiness 401k, which I really like as a metaphor, is loving relationships. And
Yeah.
of course, there's a lot of talk these days about the loneliness epidemic and how we're lonelier than ever before. There's some pushback about that. Some people say, actually, it's not true. Wondering where you stand on that, and just where you stand on that.
Yeah,
Are we lonelier than ever before?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's a huge problem. And there's a couple of different things, a couple of different ways that we look at it. The number of people that we report know us well, that has been declining for a long time. The number of people that we would consider to be close friends, that's been declining for a long time. And then just the markers of loneliness with respect to depressive symptoms has been increasing for a long time. And then the real question is, what's going on? Part of it is that romantic love is in just wholesale decline all the way across the West. And I don't know about the data outside the West, because I haven't seen it, and maybe it doesn't even exist. But in the United States, for example, romantic love for people in their 20s today is down by about a third. And, that's catastrophic. And part of the reason for that is that, people talk about the passion for romantic love, the dopamine. I mean, you look at the brain of somebody who's recently fallen in love, and it looks like a methamphetamine addict's brain. I mean, it's just oxygenating the ventral striatum of the brain, just like, and it's unbelievable. But what happens, the reason that brings ultimate happiness, because falling in love is exciting, but doesn't bring happiness. It brings jealousy and surveillance behaviors and all kinds of things that are not associated with happiness typically. But if in a healthy relationship, you also get this other neuropeptide that functions as a hormone called oxytocin. And oxytocin is the warmth that comes from human love. The best relationships, they go from passionate to companionate, and the basis of that is very, very, very close friendship. So the fact that romantic love is in decline means that we'd have less friendship and we have more loneliness. The second thing is that we get this junk food epidemic called social media. The junk food of social life is social media, because you can't get any oxytocin from social media. And we're craving this neuropeptide in our brains. Our brains are screaming out. It's physically uncomfortable. So during the coronavirus epidemic, during the lockdowns, people who were either isolated completely or just living with somebody, or even living with family, but hadn't really improved their relationships with family, or becoming, this was like the Divorce Lawyers Full Employment Act of 2020. It was just ruining relationships, actually. That they found that they were restless, they couldn't sleep. And a lot of this had to do with this oxytocin scarcity that was going through their brains. And people would turn to binging social media as a result of that, and actually get lonelier. It's like, I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat Big Macs and fries and chocolate shakes all day long. And you're going to over-consume calories and under-consume nutrients. And it's a direct metaphor for what's actually been going on. So you have a lot of fear from young people of rejection. You have a culture that says that men and women should be afraid of each other or should resent each other for all sorts of reasons. And then you have a social media culture in which people are substituting these virtual relationships for real relationships. And all that adds up to is a real oxytocin deficit in our society. And that's manifest in loneliness. And I look coming out of the coronavirus epidemic, ordinarily you'd have 9.5% of the population have depressive symptoms. Symptoms of clinical depression is 28% right now. And most of that's because of loneliness.
I can't help think.
Sorry, go on, Emma.
I was gonna say, I can't help think as you're saying this about the decline of romantic love and the junk food eating is just the immense popularity of shows like Love is Blind, just basically like romantic love, like junk food on steroids.
Yeah, it's also, it's nutty. It's crazy. I mean, all of the stuff that we see, not only is it super torqued because of our culture and, the way that we've told people that they should resent and be afraid of each other. It's also torqued in a big way in our popular culture by these myths of things like destiny and soulmates. And these things are completely wrong. Love at first sight does not exist. I mean, there's a ton of research on this. It's just sort of this romantic ideas that actually what they wind up doing is destroying romance. People who believe in soulmates are more likely to blow up their relationships. They're more likely to ghost their partners when things aren't going right. They're less likely to display forgiveness. They don't even have the hygiene to develop a good romantic relationship. So our cultures, it's a double whammy. We're taking away the oxytocin and we're replacing it with these like some sort of noxious but colorless and odorless gas that we get that, like in things like Love is Blind.
But isn't there the question then of expectations? You talked about that before, about happiness and what we think of happiness. These are very sort of short duration data sets, meaning our awareness of a delta, of a change from depressiveness to happiness or contentment to discontentment is really of the past 50 years, maybe 60, but it's not like these questions have been asked for time immemorial so that we can have a control group of Burgundian peasants in 1512 versus Cambridge in 2022. And
that'd be grim. Yeah, I don't want. Yeah.
Right. So, but I wonder therefore, we're extrapolating a lot based on a moment in time where a series of expectations about what is possible for human life are probably at an apex based on the 20th century. That, and I mean, look, you can disagree with me on this. It just seems to me that the belief that a human life can be safe, healthy, long, happy, full of friends, connectivity, romantic love, self-actualization, a job you want, a house you've created where more is possible rather than less, like all of that suite of expectations, which is a product of 19th century progress and 20th century somewhat material success and innovation, would be pretty alien to a lot of human beings. For a lot of
add in 21st century atheism, and you've got the full Monty. So that's basically what we're talking about. Yeah.
So how much of happiness, or rather, how much of discontent is the mismatch between unrealistic expectations? You talked about it before, the idea that there should be no struggle being just one of many,
right,
as opposed to an actual step backwards from some point of genuine contentment.
It's not clear that there are a lot of schools of thought on this. There is kind of a sentimentalist school of thought that there was some halcyon period in which real contentment was happening. But I tend to not believe that, only because if I look at what people were writing, going back to Plato was talking about kids these days. They don't know how easy they've got it, and then in Jesus Christ says, woe be unto this, this generation. And then you go, I mean, every 20 years, everybody thinks that the last 3 generations were worthless, except for the greatest generation, like, right, that won World War II. By the way, they were named the greatest generation by the greatest generation. So take it for what it's worth. And no matter what, we're always doing that. That's like the boomers can't stand the millennials, and the millennials think the Gen Zers are a bunch of slackers. And it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. I think there's really kind of nothing new under the sun. But the problem is that all of the progress that we're offered has sped up in a very big way, but it's been in the hands of people that don't understand the dynamics of actual human happiness. What we've done over the past 30 years is we've handed the keys to our society, and a great deal of our money and our time and our energy over to engineers and bureaucrats. People who basically have the same worldview, which is that we can engineer a better world where you'll be happier and have more love. This is and we say, okay, good, fantastic, go do that, right? Give me the apps, give me the social media, give me the dating apps, give me the cradle to grave welfare state, give me the whole thing so that I won't be lonely and I'll have what I need and I'll be completely contented and all will be well. It's basically it's sort of, blue pill engineering, and then guess what? It doesn't actually give us what we want because it can't. Bureaucrats, and I don't say cast aspersions. I like living in a welfare state. Don't get me wrong. I want people that I love my taxes going to help people that need help. I love that. I think it's literally the greatest achievement of the capitalist system is that, but it's not going to bring people love, and people need love. People need faith. They need family. They need real friendship, not deal friendship, by the way. And they need work in which they can serve other people and feel like they're earning their success. These are the habits, the portfolio of habits of happy people. And last I checked, Facebook can't do that. Microsoft, Amazon, Apple can't do that. Google can't do that. The state of California can't do that. The education system can't do that. They're not built to do that. But we're looking to them and handing over all of our cash and then wondering why we're still bummed out. Well, that's why.
So Arthur, how can we build those connections and friendships and love in our life when we, like you said, seem to have handed over the keys? For instance, if you happen to be a millennial woman looking for love in a time where romantic love has declined, asking for a friend, obviously.
Right?
Yes, I'm asking for a friend. Really, like how does one swim against that tide then in an individual way?
Yeah. Well, part of it is that you need to swim against the tide. You need to rebel. You need to basically say, I'm not going to play. I'm just not going to play. I'm not going to do that. What I'm supposed to do? I'm supposed to be afraid of this and I'm supposed to do that. I'm supposed to buy this and I'm supposed to avoid that. Well, you're being told lies. You need the right formula. The world has given you a formula, Emma, and the world's formula sounds almost right. And here's the world's formula. Love things, use people, and worship yourself. That's what the world's telling you to do. It's like 6 easy words, man. It's like, what are people for? To use for your pleasure, to use for your career, to use for your opportunities, to use. That's what people are there. People are instrumental. What are you going to do? You're going to love stuff. Are you kidding me? You want to be happy? Get that car. That car is awesome. Get that car. It's super great. Go on that vacation, sit on that beach, buy those clothes and worship yourself, because who else are you going to worship? This is the social media is the church of me. That's really what the social media is all about. Social media is this temple to myself, basically. Well, the thing is, that sounds right because it's so close to correct, but it's not. It's actually, so St. Thomas Aquinas in 1265, when he wrote the Summa Theologica, he called these things the idols that attract people. They're incredibly magnetic. They don't give us what we want, but they're close enough that they'll draw us in. They're like a rubber worm that a bass is going to eat because it looks like a real worm, but got a hook, right? So here's the real formula. Remember, the counterfeit formula is love things, use people, worship yourself. The right formula is use things, love people, and worship the divine. That's the right formula. Now, you got to figure out what that means. But that's the adventure. That's why it's so awesome that if you're basically following that, going, it's like, so Emma's plan of life is, okay, I'm going to love people today. I don't care if it's embarrassing. I'm going to tell 3 people I love you today. I'm going to tell my friends. I'm going to tell my mom. And sometimes it's going to be safe and sometimes it's going to be dangerous. Yeah, dangerous life. I'm going to use things with abundance. Look, I'm a capitalist. I want to use things with abundance, right? I don't want to abuse things and throw things away and ruin the earth, but come on, stuff is for using, but it's not going to bring me happiness because I'm just going to use it. That's all. That's what it's all about. And I'm going to be on the spiritual path. I'm going to be looking for what that means to worship the divine. I don't know what that means. Now I know what that means for me. And a lot of people think that they know what it means for them, but the path itself is it's like being Lewis and Clark trying to find the Pacific. It's the most exciting thing ever. If these are the 3 objectives, if you go from the wrong formula to the right formula, then it's a crazy world. I mean, this is a dangerous world. This is an adventurous world. This is like, you don't know what you can expect. It's not going to be ordinary. It's not going to be boring. And you might just find your bliss.
So can we go for a moment to shift gears from the personal to the political, not about politics, just the political, and a little bit about Arthur Brooks, who we'll talk about in the third person for one moment, has had
that guy.
that
That
guy.
bald 57-year-old guy. Yeah.
But you've had a kind of extraordinary, unusual career in that for a period of time, you were the head of the American Enterprise Institute, which for most coastal liberal viewers is perceived as at best right-leaning and at worst very much to the right intellectual organization.
Evil. Yeah, right.
And
yeah.
yet you have managed to thread a very unusual needle in that your voice, your sentiments, your writings, your intellect has been both lauded and acceptable by many people on the right and clearly by many people in the center and many people on the left in a way that is increasingly unusual in contemporary society. I assume, given your acumen and self-awareness, you've thought about this and thought about the uniqueness of your own placement in the firmament. So how do you explain how Arthur Brooks has been able to navigate what so few people have, and like, what are the constructive lessons of that, or is it just a sui generis luck of the draw?
Yeah. It's that. I mean, I don't give it too much thought, actually, and I appreciate your really kind words. It actually gets weirder than that. I mean, I don't know if you know, but I started off my career as a classical French horn player. So I didn't go to college until I was 30. I spent, from 19 to 31 playing classical music, chamber music, and I was in the Barcelona Symphony in Spain for a bunch of years.
Well, that explains everything.
Yeah. So in other words, but the whole point is, I have this theory, and I don't know if it's right, but my theory is, you get to invent your life. That your life is your startup. Your life is your enterprise. Don't screw it up by just wasting it. I mean, and screw it up by screwing it up is the whole point. By take a shot, and when you want to do something else, spiral around. Take your career down to the studs. Take your work and your life down to the studs every 10 years and start again if you want to do something different. Because you get a certain number of years, and you got to have an adventure, and you got to love other people, and you got to lift people up, and you have to find the best way to do that. And so, I have certain beliefs. I love the American Enterprise Institute because it's dedicated to alleviating poverty and the strict equality of human dignity, and using market forces to do that is the whole point. And not everybody agrees, but that's cool. That's cool because, maybe I'm not right. Maybe I'm wrong. And so I'm thinking about, who's got a good argument, right? And so I'm not a dogmatist on it. I'm not pugilistic about my ideology. I change my views constantly. I try to have enough epistemic humility to do it. And all of that is based on the fundamental proposition that I believe that everybody is fundamentally equal. And I believe everybody is a child of God. And I believe that we all have the same kind of dignity. And my job is to love everybody and lift them up as much as I possibly can. And sometimes it's controversial and sometimes it's not. But I think if you come at the adventure of life from the point of view that's saying, I love you, these are my values, I offer them as a gift, never as a weapon, it usually turns out okay.
Arthur, since you talked a little bit personally just now, from a professional point of view, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit personally about yourself from a religious point of view. I mean, it's definitely something that's in the book, but it's interesting because in the book you even say, like, I debated putting in this chapter because so many people are allergic to religion nowadays. So I was just wondering if you could talk about your journey with that a little bit. Like, is that something you grew up with, or is this a newfound thing, and what traditions do you follow and all of that?
Yeah, I'm a Catholic, but it's been a funny road. I grew up in a Christian home in Seattle, Washington, and my parents weren't super religious, but we attended religious services, and we consider ourselves Christians. And I had kind of a mystical experience when I was a teenager and became Catholic. And probably it was adolescent rebellion, but my parents were like, it's probably better than drugs. So I guess, cool. We'll let this one slide. And And then I met and married my wife. Actually, I moved to Barcelona because I fell in love with a girl who didn't speak English and I didn't speak any Spanish. The reason I went to the Barcelona Symphony was actually in pursuit of this girl, this hopeless romance. I mean, it was completely crazy. And we just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. We have 3 grown kids. And our communication has marginally improved over the period. But the key thing is that we followed a spiritual path together over 3 decades. And this is one of the most critical things that everybody needs to understand, that there's a concept called metacognition. And metacognition is going through life in a way where you're aware of your urges, tendencies, and feelings so that you can manage them. And there's a lot of neuroscience behind it. I mean, it's like tendencies and urges and feelings, they originate in the limbic system of the brain. And when you understand them and when you think about them, they go to the prefrontal cortex where you can actually manage them. The most powerful thing that you can do when it comes to trying to understand the mysteries of the universe is joint metacognition, where you are with somebody that you love and trust, and together you can navigate these incredible mysteries. And that's what we've been doing. We've been jointly metacognitive on the spiritual path and I realize I'm sounding like some new age crazy person when I say that, but this is actually based, believe it or not, it's based more in science than it is in new age ideology. And we've been looking for the spiritual way together. And I dedicate this new book to my guru, and that's my wife. I was in southern India studying with a great, Vedic master, one of the disciples of Sri Ramana Maharshi, one of the great Hindu masters of the past 100 years. And it's one of his disciples named Nochur Venkataraman. He's a Tamil guy. And he's asking me about the spiritual path, the same question you just asked me. And I said, my wife, she leads me on paths of righteousness. We pray, we meditate the rosary, the holy Catholic prayer of meditation every night together. And we learn, we read, and she teaches me. She leads me by the hand. And he said, she's your guru. She's your guru, which for Hindus, it's a really big deal, right? It's a really big deal. And so that's really the essence of it. The Catholic faith for me is the way for me to find the verities of life and to explore the beauty that is the adventure of life. That, it's ultimately what the meaning of what I'm trying to do is, to lift other people up and bring them together in the same spirit as my Lord and Savior. And not everybody agrees with me on that either. And at the end of my life, maybe at some point, I'll find out if I was right.
That is, it's unusual. You're an unusual soul to be able to express both your personal journey and then iterate it through multiple lenses of politics, of people's political behavior, of people's personal behavior, from young to old. And I do want to acknowledge that, because it's not as if the world is littered with people who navigate sort of the personal, their own inner life and their awareness of everyone else's outer life with such fluidity. I don't know that that's an easy path to emulate, even though you lay out a way in which everybody can presumably become more of whoever they're supposed to be at whatever point in time they're supposed to be that. But it does require, it requires a comfort that you have with words like love juxtaposed to realms that usually have done their best to elide human emotion, right? You don't hear a lot of talk of love on Capitol Hill. And you don't hear a lot of talk of what is the purpose of us all being here in worlds of money and politics.
True enough.
Much to our collective. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that in times past, leaders did talk about love.
Yeah.
George Washington talked about love. Abraham Lincoln talked about love. The Gettysburg Address was about love. It's incredible to me that we've got this desiccated understanding of what politics and public life is supposed to be about. If it's not about love, it's not about anything. What is it about? Money? How boring. Is it about, power? It just couldn't be more boring than power. Power is the most boring thing ever, right? And yet we talk as if love were something in the private realm. No, love is the most public thing ever. It animates us. It fires our soul. It's the nuclear fuel rods of our happiness. And as such, it should be at this very center of how we see ourselves and how we govern ourselves, how we share our values with other people. It doesn't rule out even conflict. On the contrary, it should motivate the right kind of conflict. And yet somehow we're this husk of a culture in which the things that I said just now are weird. I mean, that's weird, actually, I think.
I wonder at what time love became embarrassing like that. Like, when did that change?
Yeah, well, the idea of private love, there's this old joke that there's a man in Minnesota who loved his wife so much that he almost told her, that, yeah. And so there's this kind of the American Stoic, the American Gothic, Grant Wood's famous painting of the farmer in Iowa with his wife, grim looking, holding a pitchfork. And so the private sentimental idea of love probably would not have been expressed, 100 years ago. You would have talked about love for nation and love for humanity, but that's kind of culturally contextual too. I mean, if you go back and look at how the commandment, it's interesting when I talk about love, for example, just from a more of a mystical perspective. A Pharisee asks Jesus, the 10 commandments, it's a lot to remember, Lord. I mean, it's like 10's a lot, so boil it down for me. And Jesus is like, okay, easy. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. That's one. And number two, love your neighbor as yourself. Right now, that has everything in the world packed into it, because if you want to love God, where God is omnipotent and doesn't need anything, including your love, the only way that you can do that is by actually loving people who are made in his image. So it makes kind of perfect sense. That's why it's an adjunct. Okay, so 300 years later, St. Augustine is asked, even that too is too much. Boil it down. St. Augustine said, love and do what you will. Love and do what you will. That does not rule out the sentimentality of love between friends, of love between lovers. I mean, it's all love is the most important thing, because that's the punchline of the great Vedic traditions of love, of the Hindu traditions of love, that the whole concept of love of the divine means that God is pulsating love, that our souls are a little chip of that love, destined to be manifest in ourselves in terms of love, and that samsara, the endless cycle of birth and rebirth, occurs because we have not achieved perfect love. And look, it all comes down to this at the end of the day. I'm a PhD social scientist, but strip all the junk away and all the math that I've done, and this is all I got. This is all I've got. I mean, it's just one word.
I feel like we should just end with that one word, given that we could hardly do better, even though we could absolutely have a much more extensive conversation about all the ways that love and its motive force could be applied in multiple realms to much greater effect than is currently in evidence in our local, national, and certainly global scene. But maybe we'll save that for a next chapter of our conversation. Thank you so much for having this with us today, Arthur.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for doing this program. I know you're lifting people up. I know you want to bring people together, and I know you want a better world. And I appreciate that a lot, because I'm part of this world.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Arthur.
Wow. That was an intense, illuminating, and in many ways beautiful conversation that I didn't really expect to go quite in the directions that it went, but I am delighted that it did. And it's a real reminder of how much more, at least I feel, we should be having conversations that weave in and out of our inner lives and our outer worlds, right? And that the degree to which those have become seemingly separate and non-communicating realms of human experience is one of the many fissures that rents our current world. I was also really struck by that emphasis on contemporary understandings of happiness as the absence of struggle, or the absence of pain, or the absence of challenge, is one of the most significant impediments to genuine happiness, because it's the cost of trying to avoid conflict or avoid struggle is immense relative to whatever one can gain from it.
And I think that we're missing that a lot in modern society. There's actually, since we're on this conversational track of weaving in our inner and outer lives, there's a really nice prayer. It's a Puritan prayer that this reminds me of. And if you will forgive me for reading a couple lines, in the middle, it's called The Valley of Vision. In the middle, the author says, "Let me learn by paradox that the way down is the way up, that to be low is to be high, that the broken heart is the healed heart." And it goes on from there. But so essentially, the essence of what you're saying is that all of life is life, and we forget that or ignore that at our peril.
And look, I mean, part of the point of the Progress Network was that a huge portion of our shared reality is filtered through platforms of media or communication. And the contemporary version of them, in particular, either privileges very hot emotions, anger, outrage, fear, or on the other hand, euphoria, excitement. It doesn't privilege the complexity and the put one foot in front of the other and the work and all of those things, because that doesn't activate those either pleasure or pain centers with the same immediacy that is required to make these platforms function. And look, that was true with yellow journalism and pamphlets in the 18th century and newspapers in the 1890s. It's not like human beings were talking the way Arthur Brooks talked 150 years ago, or the way Thoreau talked, right? Those were always exceptions to the rule. But there are lessons that we really, really need in a world where the sheer volume of noise and cacophony that moves toward, I want it now, and I want it easy, and I want it seamless, and that anything that are roadblocks and obstacles are seen as unequivocal absolute negatives that have to end or be removed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and I will say, as a, I don't want to say a silver lining, but as a point of optimism, I suppose, against the sheer noise, is that if you do present people with the conversation, for instance, that we just had with Arthur, or, some of these things that you tend to find in the world's oldest wisdom traditions, people do stir, right? Like, it stirs something in them. It's not like that doesn't work anymore, right? And there's something comforting there, that this is what Arthur was saying, is that we're kind of all the same at the end. Like, we're all going to react to those like deep human traits and conditions.
And for sure, right? I mean, the tens of thousands of people have been listening to this podcast, or I guess hundreds of thousands by the time some of you are listening, or the newsletter that we're doing, or just the content that we're trying to propagate, would suggest that obviously there is resonance and there is an audience, and people do want to hear that. It just is right now more the exception than the rule, and it would be a totally different world, admittedly, and one that's not likely to happen in the near or the midterm, if that was more the rule than the exception. And it's a good thing that it has resonance. Arthur's book is on the bestseller list, so people are clearly hungry and listening and reading and wanting. All true. And we are having these conversations, obviously, because we think that they are vital and important. It's still nonetheless the case that it is an uphill pursuit relative to the sheer weight of the culture and the volume of that noise. I do find it very heartening, though, the number of people that we've talked to and we'll keep talking to, who are not of that particular sentiment, who have found their own megaphones, who found their own ways to make their voices resonant in a constructive way in a complicated culture. I take the silver lining from that, that we are literally able to have these conversations and propagate them, to me, is part of there's actually more going on here in the world than just an endless litany of chaos and conflict and drama, right? Arthur Brooks is very interesting insofar as his entire tone and messaging is the absence of drama. Drama as in, oh my God, oh my God. Not drama as in there are challenges and there are problems and there are stories. He's absolutely about that.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking about what we're doing, sort of being movement uphill, and then what you followed up with after is that it might be uphill. Hopefully, it's not Sisyphean. And I guess we'll see. But yeah.
All right. Well, we will continue our non-Sisyphean task of pushing the boulder uphill, inch by inch, day by day, until we get to the crest and look at how far we've come, and what a wonderful world it is after that task is complete. And we will keep having those conversations. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Zachary.